we'll start the meeting. This is going to be a scoping meeting for beginning an environmental impact report. And so the project is the Premier on First, as you know, located between Verdugo and Tujunga Avenues on First Street. So this evening, we have a agenda, and so there's a format for this meeting. And to begin with, we have the applicants team here to do a brief presentation and walk you through the project description. And then afterward, we have the city's environmental consultants, Meridian Consultants, here to explain the environmental review process and walk you through the steps of preparing an environmental impact report and the role of tonight's meeting in beginning that environmental impact report. With that, I would like to turn the mic over to the Cusumano Real Estate Group, and they will begin their presentation and walk us through the project description.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening. I'm Michael Cusumano of the Cusumano Real Estate Group, and it is our pleasure to present to you the Premier on First project. I'll walk you through the project and really just do a fairly brief introduction, and really we'll be here to answer questions that any of you may have. So the Premier on First project is located at the intersection of Verdugo and First Street, and it is a mixed-use project. The building that will be located on the intersection of Verdugo and First Street is primarily a residential building. It will include ground floor retail space and 154 apartments located above. The second phase of the project, which will be built on First Street and Tujunga, will be either a hotel or an office building. So as you can see, the site is located in the heart of downtown Burbank, about a block off the Golden State Freeway. It has freeway accessibility from the Golden State Freeway, and it's one of the closest developable sites to the downtown metro station. You can also see that in this closer blow-up of the site, it's directly adjacent to the Holiday Inn, across the street from the new Marriott Residence Inn, just down the street from the Hilton Garden Inn, which is under construction, and directly adjacent to the Verdugo Towers. So one of the issues that we looked at when we first began to look at this site for development was its proximity to transit. So as I mentioned, this site is one of the few sites in downtown Burbank that is directly walkable to the Metrolink station, either down Verdugo or over Olive Avenue. And one of the other issues that we looked at was that of height. Now, this project is in a zoning designation that allows the 14-story height that we propose. It's also directly adjacent to the Holiday Inn, which is 20 stories. So even though it's a relatively tall project, it is in keeping with the surrounding building heights and the surrounding zoning. I'll also note that the project as proposed is 100% compliant with Burbank 2035 and the Downtown Burbank Specific Plan. I'll also note that because the site is within a quarter mile of the Metrolink station, it's entitled to a density bonus of up to 25%. This project has not applied for the density bonus. So this application is under the basic density zoning that's permitted under the site without an additional bonus in density for either the location in the transit center or as an exceptional project. So again, this is just a close-up of the project getting closer and closer. This is an aerial site. Again, you can see the site in the sitter with the red line around it, and that gives you an idea of what the surrounding uses are. This is the a section at the ground floor level. The ground floor of the residential building on the Verdugo and First Street will be retail on the ground level and include the building lobby and some building amenities. Loading for both buildings is through the alley that runs between Verdugo, runs from First Street to San Fernando, between Verdugo and Tahunga. On the podium deck, you will see the residential building on the right. It is basically a C-shape built around a courtyard and swimming pool. On the left, you'll see the footprint, the podium level footprint of the hotel. So again, this is the residential component. When we looked at this site, we thought for a long time about what we wanted to do here, and we made the decision that we wanted to do high-rise apartments in Burbank. That's something that has not been done in Burbank before, but the zoning on the site allowed us, the height limits on the site allowed us, and we felt that this was a segment of housing opportunity that does not exist in the city of Burbank. I'll also touch on the demand for housing in the city of Burbank. The city of Burbank was projected to grow by 9,000 residents between 2010 and 2020 by the Southern California Association of Governments. The projection was that Burbank needed to build approximately 4,500 housing units to absorb that increase in population. In the first 5 years of that 10-year period, we've built a net new 50 housing units. So Burbank is in dire need of additional housing. And as we looked at what is the best place to try and build housing, our conclusion, and I think the conclusion of many, is to build that housing in areas that do not impact existing single-family neighborhoods. So again, this project is built in the heart of downtown Burbank, adjacent to transit, adjacent to the 5 freeway. So people that live here won't ever have to drive through residential neighborhoods. They will be able to get directly on or off the 5 freeway. They will be able to drive to the grocery stores, to retail, to entertainment, to dining, to the places they go, to the places they work, without having to impact residential neighborhoods. So as I mentioned, the project is 154 units. It provides full code parking. So again, because of the proximity to transit, because of the proximity to the Metrolink station, most projects in this location would seek a reduction in parking. That is what the trend is in urban development today. This project is fully parked to code with both parking for residents and parking for guests. So the phase 2, the project on the other corner on Tahunga and First Street, is a hotel project. So the entitlement that we're seeking is to have the flexibility to build this either as a hotel or as an office building. So I think that our preference today would be to build this as a hotel. There is a dramatic demand for hotel rooms in Burbank, and what we would envision is a hotel that's a little bit of a higher end hotel. This hotel is designed, has meeting spaces, it has a rooftop banquet space, and this is 230 rooms. So as you can see, this would include some retail space, some restaurant space. On the top floor, it would have a restaurant or a banquet facility, and again, as I mentioned, 230 rooms. The alternative use for that same corner, in a building that's basically the same size but with a different use, but still a commercial application, would be an office building. So in this project, this would be 147,281 square feet of office space. Again, this building is parked fully to code. So anyway, that wraps up our presentation. I'm available to answer any questions that anyone from the public may have.
In your perfect world, when would you have the Phase 1 completed?
So we submitted our application to the City of Burbank for all of the entitlements that need to take place in July of 2015. We are now in the process of working with the city to, as they complete the environmental impact report. So because this is a relatively large project, the decision was made very early on in the process to undertake a full environmental impact report. So the consultant that's been retained by the city is in the process now of looking at all of the impacts. So that slows the process down. So that it's a long answer, but that slows the process down. But what it does is it ensures the public that every aspect of the project has been thoroughly looked at and mitigated. So we're expecting that this process will be completed hopefully by the fall of this year. Once that process is completed, there's a tremendous amount of planning and engineering and finished design work that needs to take place, and that will also take about a year. So ideally, we would like to break ground for this in early 2018. Again, in the perfect world, the second phase would take place about the time that's finished, which would be early 2020.
Why did you decide not to apply for the density bonus or parking exception?
I'm going to start with the second issue, the parking first. I think that the way that we use transit is changing, especially on a generational basis. So my kids are in college, and they use Uber a couple times a week. A lot of my kids' friends don't have cars because they use trains. My son loves to take the train, a lot more than I do. So, I think that younger people are using traditional transit modes, that is owning your own car and driving it everywhere you go. So I think that there's a really good argument to reduce parking. And what you're seeing in a lot of cities throughout Southern California, throughout the world, is that none of them are providing the same levels of parking that were provided, say, 20 or 25 years ago. It's a real exception, to tell you the truth, to build a project like this that basically has 2 parking spaces plus for every apartment. Why didn't we take advantage of that and incorporate that scheme into this? Is that in the past, in the city of Burbank, there has been a lot of resistance to projects that aren't parked to code. And that is really, Burbank has pretty much made it clear that they want things to be parked to code. And so we could have challenged that. We could have put up an argument that this is a great project, it's got a lot of exceptional components that would allow this to work. We made the decision not to do that. Density bonus is another difficult issue. So while it's provided for in the code, there's been some resistance to actually seeing it make it into projects. And so what we decided to do was to stick right down the middle of the road, stay exactly within the boundaries of Burbank 2035, and have a project that could be easily approved without asking for any of the transit or exceptional density bonuses that we probably would have been able to get.
What will the rental rates be in the apartments?
So, can we go back to the apartment page? So the actual apartment rents will obviously be a function of what the market is. These apartments won't make it onto the market until the year 2020. And I would love to have a crystal ball and be able to say what the markets are going to be then. I just don't. Do we have the what the breakdown is between 1s, 2s, and 3s and the square footages? So let me talk a little bit about our unit mix. In this particular project, we have one-bedroom apartments, two-bedroom apartments, and three-bedroom apartments. Is that right, Daniel?
Yes.
And so these units, again, are larger than what most units in the market are. The one-bedroom units are 830 to 880 square feet. Two-bedroom units are 1,140 to 1,150 square feet. And some of the larger units, the penthouse units, extend up to about 2,800 square feet. So these are relatively large units. And again, that's a decision that we made that is bucking the trends of what's happening in urban design. Many apartments that you're seeing that are being built today are being built that are much smaller than what typical apartments are. But we think that these would be alternatives to single-family homes. So we've got larger units, and they will be more expensive than most of the apartments that you're seeing in Burbank. If these were on the market today, the rents would be somewhere in the $275 to $3 a square foot range. What that means for 2020, we'll let the market decide.
Upper income apartments?
Yes, these will be upper income apartments.
Thank you. Just as general reference, I was curious as to how the cost modeling worked out between the elevated parking levels versus traditional subterranean parking.
So we expect that the above-grade parking will be marginally less expensive than the lowest grades of the subterranean parking. We've got a 38,000 square foot site, and as you go deeper and deeper, the cost of excavation and the cost of that subterranean parking becomes really prohibitive. And so, do we have a section by any chance? No, we didn't bring a section. So there is some cost savings by putting some of the additional parking above the retail on floors 2, 3, and 4.
Brings up another interesting question. When you build parking above ground, is the construction process less impactful to the surrounding neighborhood rather than digging down considerably?
So the issue with digging down considerably, and for a project like this, if we were to try and put everything underground, it would be a fairly deep hole. It does create some issues. You have to shore, you have to do tiebacks, you have to haul a tremendous amount of soil out of the site that needs to be trucked across roads, needs to be disposed of. So all of those things create additional issues for us and for the community. To the extent that you're building the parking above the retail, you don't have to do that. There's much less soils to get rid of. And so, again, that's another reason that we think that. Also, there's the time issue. Doing the excavations and taking all that soil out, doing all that shoring, and then building the parking back up is a very time-consuming process as well.
What kind of retail do you anticipate?
So what we would ideally like to see is retail that serves both the residents in the property and the surrounding area. And the retail space is relatively small. It's 10,400 square feet, and we do not have a committed retail tenant at this point. Again, this is a project that is 4 years away from opening its doors, at least 4 years away from opening its doors, between 4 and 5 years away. And so we don't have that. But just like we did with Telaria, when we actually went out and looked for our tenant, what we tried to do was find a tenant that is a big attraction for the residents, a tenant that will provide services that the tenants can use on a regular basis, and also provides benefit to the neighborhood in general.
Will you have, like solar panels, A&E?
So this project, much as our Telaria, will have a pretty wide array of LEED type amenities. I don't know, in fact, that we will move forward with LEED certification for this because of the process itself, but certainly the design and the intent of the project will be consistent with that, which will include solar panels. It will include solar preheating for hot water. It will include electric charging stations, as again, I talked about the transition from the way that we use transit, but also the type of transit that we use. When this project opens in 4 or 5 years from now, there will be a lot more electric cars. Our Telaria project, which is under construction now, I think will have more charging stations in that one project than all the public spaces that are available in the city. So again, a project like this will have a lot of charging stations because that's where the demand is. The people that live in this building will have a very high likelihood of having a plug-in or a hybrid car.
Just generally speaking, the parking that you're listing here, do you typically, with apartments, do you typically factor 1 car per bedroom? Is that typically how it's done?
I like to do it that way, but it actually ends up being a little bit heavier than that. The parking for this project is 1.75 cars, or 1 3/4 cars for every 1-bedroom unit, and 2 cars for every 2-bedroom unit, plus 20% additional parking. Is that right, Ian? 20% additional parking for guests, plus the parking for the retail. And so none of that is double counted. There's an argument to be made that if, parking spaces that are used by one user during the day might be used by another user at night, there's some efficiencies to that. Strictly on the gross number of spaces, there's no double counting or no overlapping.
So if there's 20% additional for guests, seems like 350, give or take, is probably what the apartments are worth. Then 90, give or take, is the 20% above that, and then the 30 or 28 for give or take. I mean, I'm just kind of what I'm really trying to figure out is whether or not there would be parking for additional things that are going on in the area. Yeah, and the answer is probably yes.
Well, it could be. It could be. I truly think that we're seeing changes in the way people demand parking. And, I suspect that some of these projects that we're building, like this project, like the Telaria project, in 20 years from now, 25 years from now, will not be old projects, but a lot of their parking will go unused.
Yeah.
That's just the way things are heading.
Probably right.
So if that happens, and if the parking becomes like unnecessary, is it easy to convert that to a higher use, the way it's above ground?
It's not easy. These are purposefully designed parking spaces. I suppose that anything's possible, but we don't go into this and design this with the idea of someday we'll be able to convert this to something else, because all of that something else requires circulation and exiting, and so maybe some creative architects will be able to figure that out one of these days, but we don't look at it like that.
A major concern in Burbank is water. And so I know a lot of people are going to look at this and ask, what are they going to drink? And so I'm wondering, in a project like this, is it not feasible to have an on-site water treatment plant so that, the water stays there and it's used and reused and purified and...
So, the economies of scale really don't make it practical to actually recycle wastewater. But what is possible, it's not inexpensive, but what is possible is to capture rainwater on site and reuse that. And that is what we are planning for the site. So rainwater will be caught, captured, collected, stored, and then reused for irrigation. the water issue is a serious issue that we take into consideration. And the fact of the matter is that living in this type of environment uses dramatically less water than people living in the format that we all grew up, living in a single-family home, having a big backyard, everybody up and down the street having a swimming pool, sprinklers, going off, and living with inefficient toilets, inefficient sinks, inefficient shower heads. And so if someday we were able to transition away from so many single-family homes and into homes like this that are very, very efficient in terms of water use, we would actually significantly reduce our overall water use. So again, because of the type of fixtures we use, because of the type of landscaping that is used, because of the fact that we actually capture and reuse water, the actual water consumption for a project like this will really be a fraction of what we typically would be used to in California.
Michael, we'll probably get to know each other during the process. I own an audio production facility that's located just to the south of the Hilton project. So the neighborhood's endured the construction of Spring Hill and the Hilton. And the city's been really wonderful and got attached to those two projects some sound mitigation measures during construction, which have proven to be really helpful. And I have nothing but glowing things to say about the way Spring Hill went up, at least in regards to my business. Hilton maybe a little bit less so, but still I think pretty good. So when this gets into city council, I'll be there going, hey, sound mitigation measures, right? The other thing too that is that's I know bothering a lot of the neighborhood is parking for the construction workers. I mean, right now on a Monday or Tuesday when there's half of the streets are closed because of street cleaning, it is a real bear to find any parking. The developers of both of those projects promised that they would figure something out, which they never did. This time, I'll be pushing that the city get it in writing. So I think your project looks beautiful, and I'm all for it. I really am. It looks like it'll be a beautiful addition to the area. My thing will be sound mitigation during construction and parking for the workers during construction. Other than that, man, I'd love to see it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So we will get to know each other. We'll spend some time with you because making sure that we're sensitive to all of our neighbors' needs is very important. And we've been in this community doing this for a very, very, very long time. If somebody comes in from Century City and does their one Burbank project and they're gone in 2 or 3 years, it's a little bit easier for them to promise this or that, and if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen. We can't do that. Right. So we take this very seriously. One of the advantages that we have is that I think that in downtown Burbank, we probably own more parking than anybody besides the city. Yeah. And so we have some parking resources that we can use. And again, with sound mitigation, I understand that you're running a business, and the last thing that we want to do is do anything that impacts that.
Appreciate that, yeah. Other than that, it looks great.
Thank you.
This might be a question for Carol. So are there like open space requirements on a high-rise, like on-site or off-site? Because I'm thinking like a park would be nice, close by.
I'm happy to answer, and of course, the project staff. Oh, thank you. Carol Barrett, Community Development. The project staff here can answer the question as well. There are open space requirements. There's common open space and individual open space, and likely one of the things that the applicant will do through the development agreement process, which allows an applicant to customize the development standards, is to identify how those will be met, but maybe in an alternative fashion. So maybe perhaps fewer tiny balconies and a larger pool area. There are different ways that applicants can meet those standards, and yes, there are definitely requirements for open space for multifamily development. And Michael might be prepared to answer that question in great detail.
Relatively small site, given the size of the property, and so we have to be very creative on how we create open space, because again, we're trying to create the most inviting, the most fantastic housing opportunity for our residents. People enjoy having open space, and so it's important for us that we include it. So we have a large pool area. In addition, I didn't bring the slide, but there's also a rooftop retreat. So much of the rooftop of the residential building is elevator served, where you will go up and be able to, so we're using the rooftop as a recreational space in a way that has typically not been done, especially in Burbank. It's expensive to utilize that rooftop, but that's rooftop space that we will have available as a recreational area. I'll also point out that, it's hard to see, but if you look at the ground level of the project, there's actually a large portico share. And so parking, maybe we'll go to the floor plan. There's actually a large portico share where cars will be able to pull off Verdugo and stop on the property, out of the street, pick up passengers, get your Uber, and then they will enter back onto Verdugo, so that there actually is a very nice setback at that ground level. Now, there's parking above that, but it's a 20-foot tall open space, and so even though it's covered, it is public space. It's space that will be inviting, a space that can be landscaped. So between the courtyard area, the ground level area that is, again, heavily landscaped, and the rooftop, there actually is quite a bit of open space for a project that is relatively dense. Yeah.
Do you have any plans to use the recycled water on San Fernando?
On any of our projects where there is recycled water available to the site, we have always used recycled water. One of the issues is that the recycled water has not been brought throughout the city of Burbank, and so again, if it's available, it'll definitely be used. Anybody else? Good. Well, thank you all for coming out this evening. It's a pleasure to be able to answer your questions. If anyone wants to have questions in the future, I'll leave some of my business cards out here. Feel free to call me or email me. Email is probably the most effective way to reach me, but I'll be glad to try and answer any and all questions, and I look forward to moving this project forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't go far. If there are questions later for Mr. Cusumano, we can come back to Mr. Cusumano and answer your questions. The next stage of this meeting will be Mr. Tony Locacciato from Meridian Consultants. It's the city's environmental consultant that will prepare the EIR. Mr. Locacciato has a brief presentation, and then as we go, please do ask your questions or make your comments regarding anything having to do with the environmental or potential environmental effects of the project. I already heard a couple of questions or comments regarding construction noise and parking. Those, of course, are noted, and we will continue to take questions or comments like that as we move through this meeting. So please do let us know if you have questions or comments.
I guess I have a mic here. Is this one on?
Yeah, you're on.
Is it working? Good. You can hear me? Thank you, Brian. You've actually been through the fun part of the meeting. Move it up a little. You've actually been through the fun part of the meeting this evening, but we appreciate you taking your evening and staying. What Brian's asked me to review for you, we're going to go over the environmental review process the city is conducting, the steps in that process, what the city is already planning to study in the EIR, and then we'd like to get comments on other aspects of this proposed project you'd like to have studied. First, the city has to conduct environmental review of a project under the California Environmental Quality Act, also known by its acronym CEQA. It requires, when a city has a project that involves discretionary actions, in this case your city council can say yes or no, that environmental review be conducted. And there's a complete set of rules for conducting that environmental review in the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. When our state adopted this law, there were some primary objectives. First, to encourage informed decisions, that decisions made by cities about a project like this are informed when it comes to the potential environmental consequences. So what are the environmental effects? The way you do that is by conducting environmental review and providing information in an environmental impact report or other appropriate document. The purpose is to identify ways to minimize or avoid the significant effects of a project. Then there's the process, which you're part of this evening. One of the objectives is to increase your understanding and involvement in the environmental review process and the city's review of the project. Also, one of the final objectives was to promote coordination between different governmental agencies, which didn't always occur before we had the state law. So the city prepares notices. The notice of preparation we'll talk about in a minute has gone out to public agencies like Caltrans, the county, neighboring cities. So they're aware of the project and they can provide comments to the city on what the potential effects might be and make sure they're studied. Those same agencies get to review the environmental impact report. Again, before we had the state law, sometimes Caltrans didn't know what was being built next to their freeway. And so this process ensures that occurs. This is a flow chart showing you the process the city's conducting. The first part was when they received this application, they conducted a preliminary review to determine if the project had the potential to result in significant environmental effects. After reviewing this project, seeing its size and scope, right now the site has a 40,000 square foot office building on it. The city could see that there was the potential for significant environmental effects. Made that determination at that point that an environmental impact report should be prepared for this project. Second step in the process we're in now, it's the scoping process. That's to determine the topics that are going to be studied and analyzed in this EIR. As part of that, a notice of preparation was prepared that described the project, what the city was planning to study. As I mentioned a minute ago, that notice was mailed out to adjacent cities, state agencies, regional agencies. The city posted it on their website, made it known otherwise. The city's conducting this meeting tonight as part of that process. At the end of the scoping process, city staff will look at all the comments and will make a final determination on what needs to be addressed in the EIR. Our role, we're a technical consultant working for the city planning department, so they make the decisions, they direct all the work. We're here to prepare the document for the city staff to review. After the technical analysis is completed and the draft environmental impact report is prepared, it'll be released for a 45-day public review period. Separate notices will go out for that review period. That document will go to state, regional, local agencies. The city will make the document available on their website for everybody to download and review. They'll have hard copies here at the city. They'll have copies in the library. You can pick up a compact disc with it. There'll be a variety of ways you can get a hold of that document and review it. After that review period's over, what state law requires is that every written comment submitted will have a written response made to that comment. That'll be comments from public agencies, any comment you may have, anybody else in Burbank. All those comments and responses will be compiled along with any revisions to the analysis and the draft EIR that's made in response to those comments into a final environmental impact report. Once that final EIR is done, what state law requires then is the planning board to review it, city council to review it. First, they have to certify The EIR has been prepared in accordance with state law, adequately discloses the environmental effects of this project, and meets all the other standards for information. Once the City Council certified the EIR, then they can consider approving the project. But the first step is you have to have the EIR done, and it has to be certified. And again, the purpose is to make sure everybody has the information on what the environmental effects of the project are, ways to avoid them, ways to minimize them, and that that's considered in the review and approval of the project. When you see the draft EIR, these are the basic required components. A complete description of the project. As Mr. Cusumano said, they have a two-phase project. We'll provide you with a full description of the first phase, of the second phase, since there's two options for the second phase. We'll describe both in terms of the hotel option and the office option, because the effects of those two options will be analyzed throughout the EIR, as they may have different effects since they're different uses. There's questions about construction impacts. State law also requires that all aspects of a project be analyzed, including the temporary effects of construction. So we'll be analyzing temporary construction effects, the effects of the project once it's fully built. State law also requires that an EIR not just look at the impacts of this project by itself, but it look at combined effects that may happen from this project and other related projects in the area. Mr. Cusumano showed one graphic that showed you other projects going on in the area, so we'll be looking at the combined effects of those. In addition, the city prepared the Burbank 2035 general plan, adopted an environmental impact report for that, so we'll be looking at what are the effects of the first phase of this project, the first and second phase, the effects with the other projects in this neighborhood, and what if everything else in the Burbank 2035 general plan gets built out. That way the EIR gives City Council information about the effects that may happen now and all the way through build out of the city's general plan. And I know that sounds like a lot of fun to read. I can't promise it'll be short, but we will provide an executive summary in it. And I know Brian will enjoy answering questions about it. So we'll have that full description. We'll have a description of the existing environmental conditions for each topic we're analyzing. We'll talk about those in a second. Next is the analysis of the potential environmental effects of the project and other projects, with the key question being, will those impacts be significant or not? We'll have a threshold identified that we'll put in the document so you can see what the standard is for determining whether each impact is significant or not, identification of whether it's significant. For all impacts that are significant, we'll identify any feasible ways they can be lessened or avoided. What state law says is make sure an EIR provides information on ways to substantially lessen or avoid any impact you identify as significant. Then we'll also have a consideration of alternatives to the project. What the state CEQA guidelines require, they require analysis of a reasonable range of alternatives to a project to provide additional information on how you might be able to avoid or lessen the environmental effects that are adopted. So we've looked at the project, we've got mitigation measures there based on the impacts of the project. Another suggestion, city staff will determine a reasonable range of alternatives and will provide a comparative analysis. If that alternative was implemented, how would its impacts compare to the project? The idea is to provide additional information that allows the city council to determine the best ways to lessen any environmental effects of this project as proposed. Based on the preliminary review that's been conducted, these are the topics the city's proposing to analyze right now. First off, the aesthetics and visual impacts of the project. So we're going to be looking at the visual characteristics of the site now, the entire surrounding area, and looking at what the change would be in the visual character with the addition of these two 14-story buildings. Air quality will be a long and complicated technical analysis. We're looking at a lot of things there. We're looking at temporary construction impacts. What happens is you're building, they'll be demolishing a 40,000 square foot building, demolishing site improvements, constructing the new buildings in two phases, plus any off-site improvements that are needed. Utility improvements, we'll be looking at all those temporary impacts. The project is also near the freeway, so we'll be looking at the potential effects of the kind of air quality you have on the freeway on residential uses on the site. That's something the South Coast Air Quality Management District will be looking for. The South Coast Air Quality Management District will definitely be sending Brian a letter in response to that notice of preparation. They have prepared guidelines for use by cities like Burbank, telling the city, giving the city guidance on how to conduct the air quality analysis. We'll be conducting it in accordance with those guidelines. The Air District has a computer model available we'll be using that will quantify the amount of air quality emissions that will come for the categories the Air District needs to keep track of in our air quality management plan. We'll be analyzing all of that. Cultural resources, we'll be looking at the potential, be checking records for archaeology, paleontology, looking at the existing building, which is about how many years old now? 1952. Not old, but old enough to be looked at to make sure it doesn't have historic significance. So we'll be looking at those topics in this. Geology and soils. There'll be technical study completed looking at the geology and soils characteristics of this site and its suitability for the size and type of buildings that are proposed and any potential mitigation measures for those. Next, greenhouse gas emissions. That's a topic we didn't look at until about the last 4 or 5 years. We're now trying, each city's required to look at this and look at its part in the state achieving our goals for capping and reducing greenhouse gases. The city of Burbank adopted as a companion document to its Burbank 2035 general plan, a climate action plan. It contains a wide range of policies the city is planning to implement to make sure that new development reduces the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted. And we're going to be looking at the consistency of this project with each one of the applicable policies in that plan. Those policies address energy conservation, which there are some questions on, water conservation, solid waste, and a variety of things. The project's required to be consistent with that plan. We'll be doing analysis of its consistency. Land use and planning. The Burbank 2035 general plan is made up of a number of elements. Each one of those elements has goals, objectives, and policies, some of which apply to this part of town. So we'll be providing analysis of the consistency of the project with each applicable policy in the Burbank 2035 general plan. Noise. We'll be conducting noise monitoring to determine what the existing noise environment is. We'll be using that as a baseline to look at the potential noise impacts from constructing this project, what those are, see if that would impact any sensitive uses, such as, sounds like your business, and then looking at ways to mitigate and avoid those, including use of sound walls, sound curtained on scaffolding, and other things. So we'll be doing all that construction analysis. Then we'll be looking at the long-term effects, the compatibility of these uses with the noise environment that'll be created, looking at the additional traffic from this project and the other projected traffic on the adjacent streets to see what those changes in the noise environment will be from traffic and the compatibility with the proposed uses. Transportation and traffic, the city's Transportation Planning Division will be supervising a traffic consultant who will be preparing a technical traffic analysis. They'll be using the city's computerized traffic model and other methods. They'll be determining the amount of trips this project will generate, the new uses, how they'll be distributed on the street system, looking at how the intersections work with that additional traffic, and looking at the effect on the freeway, which Caltrans will definitely ask Brian about. So that'll be a separate study, and each of these technical studies will be in an appendix to the EIR, and then we'll do the best job we can to summarize it in plain English in the body of the EIR for you. Utilities and service systems. Because of the change in the intensity of use here from a low-rise 40,000 square foot office building to two 14-story buildings, the EIR will look at what is the effect on utilities and service system. That includes water supply, and the ability of the existing water system to deliver the amount of water and the water pressure needed for these buildings. Same thing for wastewater. What's the capacity of the sewer lines in this neighborhood to accept the additional wastewater? What's the capacity of the treatment plant that treats it to accept that? Looking at electricity, natural gas, how much solid waste is generated by the project, where will that be disposed? All of that will be combined due to the change in the intensity of uses here. And as I mentioned previously, the alternatives. last before we open it up for comments on what you feel are the potential environmental effects you'd like the city to analyze in the EIR. That's the purpose of this part of the meeting, is to get your input. There are these comment forms in the back. You can feel free to fill it out this evening, leave it in the basket there. You can also take it with you. You can mail it in. There's an address there. You can also mail comments by email to the city's planner on the project. Genevieve Sharrow's in the back of the room. Her contact information's on this form. Those comments are going to be accepted through April 13th. At the end of that period, again, city staff will go through and make a final determination on what needs to be studied in the EIR. With that, Brian, if there are any additional comments on the environmental effects of this project you'd like to speak on, we're happy to take those comments right now.
I know traffic studies don't take into consideration pedestrians and bicyclists. Can you all consider pedestrians and cyclists? Because there is a bike lane right there on Verdugo.
Actually, the city's traffic study guidelines, and as you know, there are policies in the Burbank 2035 general plan, which were not in the city's previous general plan, that emphasize all modes of transportation, including preservation and enhancement of pedestrian and bike, and those are going to be analyzed in the city's traffic study.
Great, thank you.
I see that Genevieve is, I see that Genevieve is at a web address of migcom.com. What is that?
That is another consulting firm. The city is using another consultant to help them keep track of us and conduct the environmental review process.
Okay, so she's not a city employee, she's an employee of another firm. Okay.
Under
Yeah.
Yeah, that firm is MIG, and they're under contract to the city.
Well, sounds like everybody can't wait to read the draft EIR then. Is that what we can think?
Okay. Thank you. All right, as Tony mentioned, there is a comment sheet that you may fill out, and that's an alternative method to provide comments. If you don't wish to speak tonight, that's fine. We will accept written comments until April 13th. The city has decided to extend the deadline by 30 days. It was initially going to be March 14th, so on the agenda it states March 14th. The city is going to extend that 30 days to April 13th. Also, I'd like to make an announcement that the city will hold another scoping and community meeting on, I believe it's March 28th. It's another Monday. So if you have attended this evening's meeting, you do not need to attend the second scoping and community meeting. You can, of course, attend if you wish, but it's not required. We will note all comments and questions here this evening, and everything we've heard this evening will be equally as valid as what we hear on March 28th.
What time is that, at 6 o'clock? I have some neighbors that might want to show up. 6 o'clock, probably.
Correct. Yes, it would start at 6 o'clock, yes. So you may see additional announcements and notices about that meeting. If you wish to attend, please feel free. If not, that's fine too. If there's nothing else, thank you all very much for attending this evening, and have a great night. Thank you.